how to transfer the FSMO roles from one domain controller to another. Now you will be thinking that what is this FSMO roles? We will have a look at that. The FSMO roles are 5 roles in a domain or in an Active Directory forest which controls the proper working of Active Directory, and they are divided into forest-wide roles and domain-wide roles. The forest-wide roles includes the schema master, the domain naming master, and the domain-wide roles include the infrastructure master, relative identifier master, primary domain controller emulator or PDC emulator. These are the 5 roles, and we will have a look at each of them. First, in the forest-wide roles, we have the schema master, which controls all the updates and changes to the Active Directory schema within the forest. You'll be wondering what this Active Directory schema is. The Active Directory schema is the set of rules that binds all the classes and objects of Active Directory together. If you open up a property of a user in Active Directory, you will see different types of tabs and settings there. So all these things are set up in the Active Directory schema. So the schema master controls all the updates of this Active Directory schema. If any changes come to it, it will be updated to all other domain controllers in the forest. So it is a forest-wide role. It means that there will be only one schema master in the entire Active Directory forest. Now the domain naming master. The domain naming master controls the creation and deletion of names in a forest. If you create a new domain in an existing forest, or if you create a child domain for an existing domain, the naming of those domain will be controlled by this domain naming master role. Now the domain-wide roles. The domain-wide roles are spread in a domain. Each of the domain in your forest will be having each of these roles individually. The infrastructure master role controls the object references within or from outside the domain. If someone in another domain tries to access a property of your user, that object reference will be controlled, and that details that the other domain wants will be given by this infrastructure master. And the read master controls the creation and deletion of and updates of SIDs and GUIDs, security identifiers and global unique identifiers for the objects inside a domain. The Active Directory identifies each users and objects with this SIDs. So the read master is the role which assigns the SIDs to the objects. And the PDC emulator is the primary domain controller in our domain, and it will be having the latest password of all users. It will update this password to all other domain controllers, and it also controls the time synchronization. And overall, all the clients will identify the PDC, the domain controller which has the PDC emulator role installed as the primary domain controller. This is a typical network where we have 2 domain controller installed, a primary domain controller and an additional domain controller. As default, this primary domain controller will be holding all these FSMO roles. We can move these FSMO roles from one domain controller to another for several purposes. Maybe we think that we can distribute these FSMO roles to 2 or 3 domain controllers in the forest to have a load balancing effect. Or if we think that the additional domain controller is much better, it has more RAM and CPU than the primary domain controller. If you want to make this additional domain controller a primary domain controller, if you want to promote this additional domain controller to a primary domain controller, you can move the PDC emulator and some of other roles to make this additional domain controller a primary domain controller. So these are the scenarios where we use this movement. So we will now go on to a Windows Server 2008 DC. I have already created 2 computers with Active Directory installed. One of them is a domain controller, primary domain controller, and the other one is the additional domain controller of the same domain. So we will check which domain controller holds the FSMO roles, and we will then move these FSMO roles from domain controller to another.